Dr. Roger Cleveland. And Dr. Roger Cleveland has been a partner of ours through the National FFA organization and the National Association of Ag Educators over the last, I guess, year and a half, Dr. Cleveland. And he's gotten to be a part of a lot of ag teacher professional developments and meet a lot of ag teachers across the nation. And we're excited to have him here today. Well, I guess he's at his home, but we're excited to have him virtually presenting about bias as part of our Agriculture Education for All platform. So thank you, Dr. Cleveland, for being here today. I also want to call out that we do have Ellen Thompson, who we tell Dr. Cleveland all the time it's not a good idea to have me and Ellen on the same call, and so he's used to hearing that. But Ellen heads up our Agriculture Education for All initiative for the National FFA organization and NAAE. So thanks, Ellen, for being here as well. And so, Dr. Cleveland, I'm going to let you share your screen. I'm going to stop sharing, and so hopefully this will be an easy transition.
Okay, no problem. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here and thank Alyssa for putting this together. I don't like to call it training. I like to call it a formal conversation. And the way we're going to try to do that today is I'm going to share some content with you, but there's some times we're going to pause and ponder. And I want you to just use some of your thoughts and observations through chat. And I'm gonna look through those and just try to address some of those thoughts and questions or comments or whatever as I go through the PowerPoint. And so we're gonna stop about 10 minutes short, and I'm going to ask you to go to a site, and I'll tell you about it a little bit, where we're gonna do, your homework's gonna do an online implicit bias assessment. It's free, it's out of Harvard. And so I'm going to ask you to do that near the end. So we'll probably stop about 1:45, 1:50 to do that. And that'll be the last thing we do. And we're not going to share our results of that, but I'm going to give you my email address where you can share those if you like to. We're making that optional. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share the PowerPoint, and there'll be sometimes where I'll just stop and we'll have some conversations through chat also.
So, and if you have a question, feel free to send it through chat. Roger, if you can't pick up on them, I'll take if you pause, I can ask some for you as well if you need me to.
Okay.
There's a lot of people on right now.
There is. It's not giving me, have you given me a access to the?
It's been acting crazy today. So hold on just a second, guys. Give us just a second to figure this out.
It's technology is always going to do that.
Now give it a try.
There it is. Okay.
Oh.
All right, great. All right. This on here real quick. Okay. And so we're going to talk about understanding unconscious bias. Let's go through the objectives real quickly and things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about unconscious bias and what that looks like in schools, and microaggression and what that may look like in schools, and what our biases and our microaggressions come from. And we'll talk a little bit about mental models, and we'll take it from there. So the objectives is participants will examine terminology and definitions related to implicit bias. Participants will reflect upon their own practices and policies and examine the lasting effects of implicit bias on learning. And we will try to understand and be able to identify microaggressions. So that's kind of the game plan today. And we'll go from there. And we'll, like I said, we'll communicate via chat, and I'll let Alyssa kind of just send me some comments and observations through chats, and we'll just have that conversation through that way. All right. So we're talking about unconscious bias. And real simple, unconscious bias is an assumption that we make, a prejudice that we have that we may not even realize. That's why it's called unconscious. It's not something we've thought about or consciously decided on. It's not based on reasoning, sound or unsound. It's unconscious. So that's why we may do something we're not aware of it. And the one thing I want to make clear before we leave the rest of the day is that we all have biases about different in the context of education or even something else. It can be something as simple as sports or color or things like that. But we're talking about context of education. And so another way to look at it is refers to bias that we are unaware of, which happens outside of our control. Is a bias that happens automatically, and it's triggered by our brain making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations, influenced by our background, which we'll talk about a little later, our cultural environment, and personal experiences. And that's where our biases actually come from. And the things which exacerbate our implicit biases are two major ones: is affinity bias, and if you all haven't heard that before, in groups and out groups. I'm sure sometimes you've experienced, if you've been on a committee where you are hired another teacher or a principal or in a committee outside of school, and a lot of times you'll hear someone say, we hired that person because they were a good fit or they were the best fit. A lot of times what that means is that it's somebody that they can respond to as like them, in group. And then confirmation bias. So let's dig a little deeper into both of these. In groups, we have natural tendencies to prefer people who are like us. In groups, we are people that we feel safer and more comfortable around and who may treat more favorably. Out groups are people that we feel less safe and comfortable around and who we might treat dismissively or disdainfully. And so those are people, the in groups, just people that we feel a little more comfortable around. And which is kind of like naturally, it just naturally happens. And let's take a moment to think about how this may impact your interaction with diverse students. So we have this natural thing about in groups where we're just comfortable with people who are similar to us and more comfortable. Think about how that may impact our interaction in the classroom. And then we'll talk about confirmation bias. And this is the one I really want to pay attention to more than anything else, is confirmation bias. This occurs when a person interprets a situation according to their own pre-existing beliefs. And those beliefs come from your past experiences and media and things of that nature, also known as my side bias. The slanted cognitive perspective ignores information that invalidates their opinion. Each new set of evidence serves to prove what the person already believes, reinforcing one's personal bias and stereotypes. So then if you have this information, even if you hear new information, if it goes against what you already believe anyway, you will find information that will confirm your beliefs. Because if you don't do that, it causes what we call cognitive dissonance. And that creates some kind of stress on you and in your mind. And so the confirmation bias is real. I'll give you an example. Imagine that you read an article about a political scandal, confirming everything you thought about a politician you dislike. You text a friend who supports the politician, and she thinks the article completely vindicates the politician. How did you both read the same article and come up with different conclusions? It could be an example of confirmation bias. And it said could be. Now, I would like for you all to just send a few chats about that example, or if you ever experienced something like that, directly or related to you or indirectly. And you probably see a lot of this on Facebook, you see a lot of this on Facebook. So Alyssa, there's any chats coming through right now?
Not yet. Oh, here we go. Every State of the Union address.
Okay, yeah. You have one side here, one thing, and the other side here, something else, right? Okay. What else?
We're also seeing it with our pandemic as well.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, the more you look for examples of people not socially distancing and someone else put on their camera, put on there watching the daily briefings. It just depends on whether you're watching 36 News or 18 News, what kind of outcome that comes from. If there's going to be more deaths, or is there going to be more cases, and where those cases are, and all the memes that come along with that too.
Exactly. Let's switch it a little bit and talk about, so how could this play out in the classroom? Confirmation bias. How could this play out in the classroom? Some folks send me some thoughts about that.
Discipline.
Discipline, yes. And you'll see that it doesn't matter where you are in the United States, what part of the country or whatever, we always have this disproportionate number of discipline infractions. And so if you were in a rural area, it's a lot of times there's boys. And I see someone saying, yeah, boys will be boys. And that's their perception of that with our confirmation bias. This is how they are. So that's not discipline, and that's just how they are. Or it could be another group of students. And so discipline is another one. Expectations, which we're going to talk a little bit later. So I just wanted to give you, I really want you to have a good understanding of the confirmation bias, because that could play out in our classrooms around particularly our academic expectations. And someone said special education. You're right. So with special education, if we've heard all these things in the past and we believe that we're going to read, we even could look at research and even, look at analyze data to make us believe those things about students with disabilities. And so it can impact a lot of things we do in education. So let's move on a little bit. Confirmation bias, avoiding confirmation bias. It's difficult to face one's own bias. No one has the same background and experiences as another person, making it almost impossible to be truly open-minded. However, coming to terms with one's own bias can result in more accurate understanding of the world. And so that's the tough part about when we call it training on implicit bias, is that, if we're struggling to reach a student in the classroom, there's some very specific instruction strategies that you can use as a teacher. It could be hands-on, whole group instruction, differentiation, all these place-based learning, all these different things, culture responsive teaching. When it comes to bias, the first ones is one, just being aware of it, and then looking within and having those conversations. So the strategies to deal with this is kind of tough sometimes, because it's just not black and white. Consider, if you want to avoid confirmation bias, consider the following questions reading a news article. So we were talking about COVID-19, the press conferences, it's constantly in the paper. So imagine yourself, all 65, 70 of you all, you're reading an article, and the next time you read an article, I want you to read that article and ask yourself these questions. What about this story makes me believe it? Okay. Is this article from a trustworthy source? How do I react when my viewpoint is challenged? And a lot of times, I want to stop right there. A lot of times with confirmational bias, if our viewpoint is challenged, sometimes we will go try to search to get new information, new data, new research to support our belief, versus considering the new information. I have a quote on my wall in my office that says, if you don't understand your opponent's argument, you don't fully understand your own. And so even though I might have a thought or belief about how schools should be ran and my philosophy of education, I still read and listen to other people's philosophy that will even support why I believe that way, or actually give me new information to consider to even modify or revise my philosophy. What percentage of my news comes from this source? Right? The only tool you have is a hammer. All you see is nails. Do I feel challenged or reinforced by the story? How many friends or acquaintances do I have whose views differ from mine? Did I read the full article, or did I jump to conclusions based on the headline? And, you know, and that's why they always have huge headlines, and that's where headlines are posted at certain places, so people will go straight there. If I consider what might be wrong, what would that mean? Exposing yourself to different perspectives doesn't always feel as good, but it is rewarding and important experience. So think about confirmation bias and what that means. It's always looking for information and things like that that confirms and supports your own beliefs. And one of those beliefs are inaccurate. And consider where those beliefs and information comes from. So that's one of the big rocks today is confirmation, is underneath implicit bias is confirmation bias, because there's implications in our schools for that. And I think some of y'all did that. Let's talk a little bit about this. I want to show you this video, and then I want you all to send me some responses to it. It's a video out of Yale.
There's a new study at the Yale Child Study Center that I had to read a few times just to believe what it was telling me. The researchers recruited about 135 preschool teachers. They had them watch video footage of 4 kids playing, a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they told the teachers, their subjects, watch the video, there may be some challenging behaviors. As soon as you see something that could become challenging, hit the enter key on your keypad. Well, here's the trick. There was no challenging behavior. The researchers were using eye scan technology to see which child the teachers were looking at most. And what they found is that the teachers, both white and black alike, spent the most time watching the black boy, waiting for bad behavior that never came. There's one more really interesting headline in this study, which comes later. The teachers were also given a 1-paragraph description to read of a hypothetical child with a stereotypical name who behaves pretty badly in class, pushes, scratches, throws toys. And some of the teachers were also given some biographical information that helped make sense of that behavior. They were told that the child lives with his mother, father has been in and out for years, they're relatively poor, the mother is depressed, works 3 jobs. Researchers wanted to know if knowing this information made the teachers more empathetic to the kid. Well, here's the shock. It did, but only if the teacher and the child were the same race. If the teacher and the child, a white teacher and a black child, or even a black teacher and a white child, knowing that biographical information, those teachers were less empathetic towards those students. And here's why this matters. Imagine if this is true, if there's this empathy deficit in preschool, well, imagine where else that's true.
All right. I want you all just send me
There's a new
some
study out of the Yale Child.
Send me some responses about the video. It's that's just a snapshot of it. There's 135 teachers involved in the study, and there's a couple of things I want to respond to, but I want to get you all's thoughts first about what you saw. Okay. Yeah, some thoughts about the video.
They're getting quiet on us.
Yeah, I see. Here they come.
There we go. Just taking a little bit of time.
That's okay. Some people are saying it's eye-opening. For non-Hispanic students, have to be aware of the work. Yep. Self-awareness is key. And so, you know, so when I show this video, and I'm looking at you all's comments, they're great. As I show this video to, I don't know how many teachers I've shown it to now, one of the conversations we have is that you notice it said it was white and black teachers, and both groups of teachers were looking at the African-American male. And so teachers have asked me about that. And I told him that sometimes there's a book that I got my doctorate at the University of Cincinnati, and there was a book that we all had to read the first year we were in the University of Cincinnati, and it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And the book's about, he's basically teaching people in poverty in Brazil how to read so they can liberate themselves. But in the book, he talks about that people who internalize oppression becomes the oppressor themselves. And so a lot of times, if women are experiencing a lot of sexism, and they internalize that sexism, sometimes they perpetuate that kind of behavior themselves. In other words, that if you really believe that mostly men should be superintendents or principals, and you heard that all your life, going back to confirmation bias, then even as a woman, you're on a search committee for a superintendent, you may feel, because all the things you've heard in the past, that a male superintendent would just do a better job than a female. And so if you internalize some of those negative things and those biases about women, and it comes out in your behavior. And so that's why some of the people may have seen, look at even the African-American teachers looking at African-American boys also. It's hard to believe it's more common. Yes, it's very common. And it's just because our experiences and things of that nature, and how we were raised and the things that we're exposed to. But the thing is to keep in mind about our biases, they're unconscious. So it's not like you're waking up, like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go suspend a Hispanic kid today. I've been waiting all week. No, it's not like that. But you may actually display some behaviors that put a student in a situation where they respond and then they get suspended or whatever. So it's not like you're planning on, that's explicit bias. And we're not talking about that. And so we have to think about that. I think it continually exists, and we all know, I think we know it, but we still don't have a large amount of engagement of PD that truly decrease and change and things of that nature. All right, good comments. Okay, good comments. That's the standpoint of young most teachers have toward them. All right, thank you all. Let's move forward. All right, so teacher expectations. Now think about how we defined implicit bias. Okay, we defined implicit bias, and then we also talked about confirmation bias and how this could actually impact our expectations of students. Teacher expectations are inferences that teachers make about future behavior or academic achievement of their students based upon what they know about these students now. And so I know in our school district, in Lexington, we use Infinite Campus, where they put their grades and comments and things like that about the students. And I always tell teachers at the beginning of the school year, before you start going back to some of the notes that are in Infinite Campus the year before, talk to all your students first, because the information from the past year can color your thoughts about that student, and they're not coming in with a clean slate. So one teacher may say something about the student based on the relationship last year. If you take that information and run with it, well, you're basing off a relationship they had where your relationship may be totally different with that student for the next school year. So we have to be really careful about using past information. It's good, but maybe not the first week, because the first week of school, when kids walk into your classroom, you see one or two things. You either see prospects or suspects. And depending on what you see is how you respond to our students first day of school, and taking considering their experiences and things of that nature. So confirmation bias can also create a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is said to occur when one's belief concerning the occurrence of some future event makes one behave in a manner that increases the likelihood that the expected event will occur. And I'm sure some of you all may have seen this before. And so it's a story about a middle school where a small school, and they had a group of 6th graders. And a group of sixth graders, this group of sixth graders of 25 in the classroom had the majority of suspensions of all the schools, just by this one sixth grade class, and was the lowest performing group of students in the entire school. So all of these 25 students matriculated from the sixth grade to the seventh grade. And there's only one seventh grade position open the following year. And the principal, Roger Cleveland, he hired a brand new teacher. And he gave all the same group of students who stuck together from the sixth grade, who had all the suspensions, low achievement, and gave all 25 students to this brand new teacher. And so the first month of the year, even though these kids had all these discipline problems in sixth grade, there was no referrals, nothing going on at all. So the principal decided to go see what was going on, because the principal couldn't believe there was no behavior issues or no referrals. So the principal goes down the hallway, looks in the window, because it was a brand new teacher, so the teacher hadn't put any paper to the window yet. Looks into the classroom, the kids were just engaged, the teacher was teaching, they were asking questions, hands were up, great things. Couldn't believe it. Principal goes back later in the semester, district's assessment scores come back. He puts that teacher's scores on, because that group of kids were the lowest performing group of students in the school. He finally looks at those scores, and the students who were the lowest performing students in that school last year outperformed everywhere in the school. So after school, the principal walks down the hallway and says, "Miss Smith, do you realize your students had the highest academic scores for this semester?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "How did you do it?" So she reached over and grabbed a sheet of paper and says, "I don't understand why you're surprised. Look at my students' IQ scores: 129, 132, 138, 143, 136, 137. He said, "Let me see those." So he snatched the paper out of her hand and said, "These are not the kids' IQ scores. These are their locker numbers." So the whole time she thought she had the highest performing group of kids in the school, and she taught that way. But it could have been a whole nother situation, depending on the information she received of it. So we're really careful about our expectations of our students based on our past beliefs and things like that. All right, pause and ponder. So we've talked about implicit bias in general. We spent a lot of time talking about confirmation bias. We talked about self-fulfilling prophecies and teacher expectations. So based on that, think about your role as a classroom teacher, things you've experienced. What's going on in your mind right now as we park here for a second? Please share. What are you seeing out there, Alyssa? What's going on? What are we talking about out there?
Dana's saying, as I consider this, if I can be cognizant of my actions to overcome this, it is obvious that my students should benefit.
Exactly.
And he's also talking about this should be looked at. Is there any studies that are looked at in reverse? Okay. Where students are applying bias onto the teacher?
Oh, I'm sure they are, and I'm sure they are.
I think a lot of times we see that in ag as well. The ag teacher.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Where my son attended school, talking about perceptions, where my son attended school in Lexington is all boys school, and it's about 96% African American males, about 4% Hispanic males, and probably about 2 or 3 white males. And so we have a program that's all African American males, getting them ready for college and things of that nature. And we partnered with the University of Kentucky around ag about 10 years ago, and was trying to get our middle school kids and their parents to get them to participate in agriculture with the University of Kentucky. And confirmation bias was that, just plows and cows, only white kids participate in ag and things of that nature. So it took us about 2 years to get them to change their perception of agriculture. Now, you can't get them to stop talking about it. At the school now, there's a FFA club, but all African males. They went to the FFA conference in Indianapolis. And so you got all these kids all into ag now, but for a long time in that particular community and that group of kids, they were only, they only perceived agriculture in one way. And that's just because they're experiencing things of that nature. I see someone mentioning the Pygmalion effect. Yes, that's a great article. Ray Rist article years ago, and people written that and also did that study. And so it's dealing with that also. How do we, as ag community, not have equity and inclusion be the next phase, the next thing that is temporary? How do we truly engage and change culturally as a group? I like that question. And it really needs to be systemic. It needs to be in our policies and our practices. And after a while, it's just part of our DNA where we don't have to think about it. It's just what we do, you know, and it's going to take a while because now you're talking about shifting and transforming the culture of the organization. So that's going to take a second. But that's a great question. How does it become, to make sure it doesn't become the next thing and then it's gone a year and a half from now? Great question. All right, let's talk about microaggressions, because this stems from implicit biases, and this is probably a little more harmful than our biases, but it stems from our biases. What are microaggressions? Brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color. And I want to stop right there. This is Dr. Sue's definitions, other definitions, because microaggressions doesn't necessarily have to be just towards people of color. It could be towards women. It could be socioeconomic status. It could be about gender. It could be about sexual orientation. The research came out of it and addressing insults towards people of color, but it's just not necessarily people of color. So you can be in a school district anywhere in the United States that doesn't have a lot of ethnic diversity, but there you can see there could be still microaggressions taking place. And as we talk about this, you'll understand what I mean by that. But Dr. Sue is like one of the renowned researchers on it. So the first one of type of microaggression is microassault. These are conscious and intentional slurs, actions, and epithets. So these are really explicit, behaviors. Then micro insults are verbal and nonverbal communication, condition snubs that are rude, insensitive, and demean a person's identity. But the most common one is micro invalidation, subtle communication that exclude, diminish, negate, or nullify feelings, experiences, thoughts, and realities of a marginalized group of people. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a person of color. And for example, we're in a meeting, and so let's say Alyssa's over in a meeting at UK, and we got all these high-powered people in there. There's some deans in there, and vice presidents, a few provosts, and it's 8 men and 2 women. And Alyssa says, I believe if we do A, B, and C, this will impact the overall enrollment at the University of Kentucky, but also will actually support the College of Ag. And people are looking at their phones, really don't make any eye contact with Alyssa at all. And then a man says the exact same thing. I believe if we do A, B, and C, then we could have stronger graduation rates, or the impact of enrollment, it'll support College of Ag. And people start taking notes and asking him questions. Tell me more about your thoughts, even though she said the exact same thing 2 minutes ago, okay? Well, they only validate her comments, her experiences, her thoughts. So think about it, you're in school and you're having a conversation about some particular topic in a classroom, and a student gives a comment or thought, and we'll only validate that comment or thought. Let's say they use the experience from their community or their neighborhood to connect to what the teacher's talking about, and we'll only validate that. What message are we conveying to that student? And how's it going to impact their interaction and engagement the next time in class. So those are, you got micro assault, micro insult, and micro invalidation. Like I said, the last one, what tends to happen to different groups of people. Examples of microaggressions in the classroom: scheduling tests and projects due dates on religious or cultural holidays, failing to learn to pronounce or continuing to mispronounce the names of students after they have corrected you, or even giving students, I'm notorious for this, but I usually get permission to do it first. Because I always connect kids' names or something like that, or around their families or whatever. But before I do that, I have a relationship with them first. And then I just ask them, I say, I'm notorious for nicknames. You mind if I call you this or whatever? They'll say yay or nay or whatever, and they say no, I won't do it. But you got to be careful, or just mispronouncing them on purpose, because you don't want to try to pronounce it correctly. Disregarding religious traditions or their details, fasting, praying, attire. Setting low expectations of students from particular groups, neighborhoods, or feeder patterns, or zip codes. Assigning student tasks or roles that reinforce particular gender roles, or don't allow all students flexibility across roles and responses. Expecting students of any particular group to represent the perspectives of others of their race, gender, etc. in class discussion debates. So you're from the Middle East. What do Middle East people think about this? We want a student to speak for millions of people, and that puts them in a situation where they may be uncomfortable. Let them choose if they want to do that. How do we create a safe space responding to microaggressions in schools for students? Create a safe environment for all students by zero tolerance of bullying and harassment. Foster a safe environment of communication and education. See beyond the surface, learn about your students and families. Avoid assumptions. Participate in professional development, sort of like we're talking about today, having conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Leadership must role model what inclusive and equitable treatment is in the workplace or at school. Commitment towards diversity from the top down. Be aware of your own biases and privileges. Everyone has them. So I want to pause right there and look at that last bullet. Can you all chat for a second about what you know or your thoughts about privilege? I want you to pause right there and just give me your thoughts and comments. When I say privilege, what does that mean to you? Don't worry about Webster's dictionary definition, but when you hear that term, what does that mean to you? Or where have you heard it from? Okay, I like that definition, unconscious rights. Okay, special treatment. Advantage over someone else, feeling entitled. I'm laughing at Sean's comment. So yeah, I do want to just, keep posting, keep chatting. That's great. I do want to talk about that for a second because I think people perceive it wrong. I think people think when you hear the word privilege that those who are privileged get a bag of money. And so that's what that means. That doesn't necessarily mean it means that you have access to certain things based on your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, your sexual preference. So it could be a number of different things, and that's why all that's called intersectionality. For example, I have privilege by being a male in this country because it's a patriarchal society, male dominated. But I lose some of that privilege sometimes because most policies are put in place are not by people who represent me. So I'll lose some privilege on that. You may have privilege because we tend to have a society that's dominated by heterosexual people. So you may lose access and some power if you're openly gay or if you're a woman. So these things intersect with each other. So you can have privilege in one space and then lose privilege in another space. I hope that's making sense. And so I was trying to explain it to one of my colleagues. I was doing something similar to this at Eastern Kentucky University. I was doing a training for faculty, and we started talking about privilege, and one of my colleagues, or white male professor, said, well, Roger, I don't understand. I don't feel like I have any privilege. I don't have any more than you have, and things like that. And so I said, okay. And I said, let me see if I can put it where you can get it. And I said, when we both came to this university, we noticed two things. The one thing I noticed was that your culture was part of the curriculum and my culture was an elective. That's privilege. And so you don't get extra credit for it. You don't get an extra stipend for it in your check, but that gives you access to things that I don't have access to, and our students. Another, here's someone put it right here, the assumption that everyone can do what I can do or see the things the same way. Exactly. Think about it. If you go to something as simple as this, you go to Walmart, and I wouldn't advise that right now, but if you go to Walmart and you look on the shelf and it says flesh-colored Band-Aids. Well, whose flesh is that? I mean, is that simple? Something that simple. There are some other things a lot more serious, but it could be something like that: flesh-colored Band-Aids, or when we say normal behavior, those kinds of things. So I just wanted to just touch on that for a second. Microaggressions. Okay, so where do our biases and microaggressions come from? They come from our perceptions. Okay, they come from our perceptions. What's in a name? I'm going to show you this piece right here. It's interesting. So if you can look on the screen, you see a house that was in the remnants of a hurricane, a tornado. So look at this research they did on hurricanes and how they name hurricanes. And once I show you this, I want you to tell me through your chat, have you heard this research before? Female named hurricanes cause significantly more deaths, apparently because they lead to a lower perceived risk and consequently less preparedness, according to research carried out. A study analyzed death rates from U.S. hurricanes from 1950 to 2012. It suggests that changing a severe hurricane's name from Charlie to Eloise could nearly triple the death toll. Please, I want you to respond to that. I found that really interesting, that our perceptions of a hurricane with a female name makes us assume that the hurricane is not going to be as severe. So we don't prepare for it. We don't move. We don't take cover and things like that. But if it was named Charlie or Sam or Roger, then we assume that the hurricane's be more severe. So we do prepare that way. I can't wait to hear your thoughts about this. And I see folks chatting away. Somebody said, what? That's crazy. Are people that dumb? Well, apparently. That's a good question. Why don't we just continue to name them after men? Other thoughts? Alyssa, what do you think about that study?
Unmute. I'm kind of with them. This is great. But then I also wonder if Hurricane Katrina, was so powerful, if maybe that's why people didn't respond.
That's amazing. I found this a few months ago, and I just hadn't had a chance to really use it in the right place. And I just find that amazing by someone's name, by male or female, that respond that way. You know, so thought that you all find that kind of interesting. And so I wonder if we think about that, people's names in other ways also.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at resumes and things of that nature, and you look at the name, and does that influence your decisions or thoughts or observations?
It's like, even when I'm chiming in here, but it's even like as a teacher, if you have a student that wasn't, the best student, you don't want to name your kid after them, and because that's a bias in, I have a Levi that's awful in class, so I don't want to name my kid Levi. So.
Yeah, it's a surprise. And so all this is really to make us think about how our minds work. And there's a good one. This is why many teachers will assign numbers to students for grading papers. Mm-hmm. Look at, I can say my son is better than we purposely chose a name that hopefully will not be seen to be biased against. So I need some of these comments, because sometimes when I raise this up, you look at me like I'm crazy. It says I'm muted. Can you hear me, Alyssa?
You're on.
Okay. And I'm just amazed like that. So I'm not the only one that may experience some of these things also. All right. What's in the name? So you all can steal that if you like to. You can probably talk about that for hours at a time, about perceptions. Okay. So part of also what impacts our perceptions is the cycle of socialization. Says we hear messages, directly or indirectly, that shape our opinion of the world. Those lessons are reinforced by influencers like parents and teachers, and through experiences and exposure to institutional forces, including media. One of the perceptions that is changing right now is about teachers, because parents are dealing with their children all day long. And the perception sometimes our parents will say, well, teachers don't work that hard. They don't have to do that much. And everybody on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter is trying to get their kids back to their teachers right now, because the perception was that anybody can teach 25 kids a different concept throughout the day. It's easy money. So they have a whole different perception of classroom teachers right now, and a different appreciation. So you all should probably get a raise after all this, because people appreciate the work that you do every day. So our socialization really, is impacted by these messages we receive, and the media and things of that nature. It's hard to find like objective news shows and things like that on television to get an objective view and to get away from your confirmation bias. And it's really difficult to do that. But the socialization. So this brings me to mental models and our perceptions and how they play out. Mental models are established by past events, experiences, media, and other messages received and serve going forward as filters through which we observe and interpret and respond to the world. They shape what we see and hear, what we feel, and what we do. Mental models give birth to stereotypes. The challenge with mental models is that they limit our ways of thinking and behaving. The good news, however, is that they have the potential to evolve through ongoing learning and interaction with new individuals and environments. Becoming aware of our mental models, which are often invisible, is the first step to effectively involving them and therefore to personal growth. So even though we have these experiences as we're growing up, these our experiences and our perceptions can change based on our experiences. I always say that, I always tell children this and parents to get their students involved in things, because exposure is the best classroom and experience is the best teacher. And so a lot of times when I'm teaching my pre-service teachers, before I even touch a book or anything like that, we spend about 2 or 3 weeks in different schools and classrooms. And what that does is piques their interest about education, about being a teacher. And so when I come back to the classroom and start talking about very different educational concepts, they can make a connection to what I'm talking about in the classrooms, what they saw 3 weeks ago. And so if I start talking about differentiated instruction, or I start talking about rigor, you know, they're like, oh, we saw some of those things. Or I say, we're talking about the importance of building relationships. And the 2 or 3 times we went to different schools, they saw teachers connecting with students and things of that nature. They can do that. So the experience they can get before 3.5 years before student teaching, I think is just as important than, you know, Roger Cleveland standing in front of them lecturing and doing activities and things like that. So your past experiences is really important. So exposure is the best classroom, experience is the best teacher. All right, I want to show you a video. So we're talking about mental models. Remember, mental models are your perceptions, and they come from your past experiences. And so this video is it's from a movie called Something New. And it's about a couple that start dating and how they're perceived, because it's a white male and African American female who they meet like in a Panera somewhere, and they start dating, things like that. But how people perceive them and how their families perceive them also. But in this particular clip, Kenya, the woman in the movie, she's in corporate America. She's like middle management, and she's having a conversation with one of the clients about a multi-million-dollar deal. His name is Jack. And in the video, you have Kenya, the African-American female. Jack is the client. The guy sitting beside Kenya, Bill, is her assistant. And during the conversation, the CEO of the company walks in. So I want you to look at the mental models, the perceptions, and even some bias in the video clip, and then we'll have a chat conversation about this. All right.
I know all about these undisclosed liabilities.
And you're not concerned.
Well, yeah, but did you see the receivables? They were here.
Yes, I looked them over. Jack,
Look, I really need this IPO to happen.
I know you do, but the deal has to make sense.
Did you see this, Bill?
Of course, Bill saw it. He prepared the document before I did the analysis. Jack, I know you're anxious about this deal, but I'm only protecting you.
Jack! Oh, Edward, you still owe me around the office? Oh, I sure do. Listen, man, why don't you take a minute and sit with us?
I'd love to, but I have a meeting. You're in good hands. Kenya knows what she's doing.
Well, after your meeting, why don't you stop back here and look at this?
Sure. Kenya, do you mind?
Not at all. Jack values your feedback, and he should have it. We're all here to serve the client.
All right. Let's think about the mental models or the perceptions of each person in the video. And so let's go with Jack first. Jack is the client, and he's made millions of dollars. So what do you think was going through his mind, and particularly his perception of Kenya? What was going through his mind? Send me some thoughts. What was going through Jack's mind? He discounted her abilities. Didn't have confidence in Kenya's ability. He doesn't think she should be leading. She's a female. Okay, so maybe she's a female. What else was going on? Okay, didn't have her best interest in mind. Do you think he didn't have confidence in her just because she was a female? Okay, someone said could have been race. He seemed to doubt her. Could have been race or gender. What about age? or both? Age, appearance. And during the conversation, he pushed the proposal to Bill, who was Kenya's assistant. And Bill had the look on his face that, you know, I don't know, I just made the copies. So he was even uncomfortable about that. So what do you think was going through Kenya's mind? What was going through Kenya's mind? Story of my life. Okay. I know it. Here we go again, ladies. You all are funny. Okay. All right. Great responses. Now, my last question is, how do you think the CEO of the company handled it when he came in? Okay, somebody said badly. How did the CEO handle it? Okay. Yeah, somebody said he caved for the business. It's all about that money, right? Well, without having to go in detail, has anyone ever experienced what Kenya experienced before? You don't have to go in detail unless you want. Weekly. I see a lot of yeses and a lot of all the times. Been a female ag teacher. So I hear a lot of people saying, yes, I've experienced this before for either gender issues or your age, all those different things. So if you experience, you know, it's real. So it's, not only do I want you to be able to be an advocate for other people, but, you know, go beyond that, be an accomplice. You know, that means you will sacrifice something else. My wife does in corporate America every day. And so these things are real. And a lot of times, now you also got to think about Jack. Now, Jack, well, he was probably in his mid to late 50s. And so Jack was a successful businessman. So you also got to think from his perspective, not necessarily okay in the behavior, but taking folks where they are. Is that when he made all his money early in the game, he was probably sitting at the table with all white men. So he did have a natural, his experience, his perception was that's who helped him get his money. So I'm saying we're not necessarily, you know, explaining the behavior away, but everybody comes from different places. So keep that in mind. I always say be more concerned about the impact before the intent. So I'm more concerned about the impact he had on Kenya as a young African-American female versus his intent first. We'll get to the intent later. Okay. All right. Good job, you all. Good job. We got a few more things to do and we'll finish up. We simply assume that the way we see things is the way they really are or the way they should be. And our attitudes and behaviors grow out of these assumptions. We simply assume that the way we see things is the way we really are or the way they should be. And our attitudes and behaviors grow out of these assumptions. So the next slide, on your left-hand side, you're going to see a woman. And I want you there's 3 dots where her nose is. I want you to stare at those 3 dots for about 20 seconds. And then I just want you to look over to the blank slide of the picture and tell me what you see. So you'll see in a second, but focus on her nose on the left-hand side first. And then after about 20 seconds, I want you to look at the blank side of the picture. Look at the three dots, the green, the red, and the blue dot. Look at the green, the red, the blue dot. The green, the red, the blue dot. Now look over to the white side of the paper screen. What did you see? Somebody said creepy, crazy, whoa. Yes, you saw a woman, right? And that's how our brains plays tricks on us sometimes. You know, because of our perceptions and things of that nature, we may see something totally different, or we see the same thing all the time because of how our brains work. And a lot of our biases is tied to the back part of our brain, the amygdala, and that's called your fast brain. And the front part of your brain is where you process information, is your slow brain. And usually when we make assumptions or snap judgments, it comes from our fast brain. In other words, we don't really process information. We don't put things in context. We just respond. Okay, and that's our fast brain. Have you ever driven home from work and you look up, you're pulling into your driveway and you don't even know how you got there? That's your fast brain. It's on autopilot. That's friend or foe, okay? Fight or flight. It's a good instinct to have, but it's also a bad instinct to have sometimes. All right, I thought I messed with your head a little bit with that activity. All right. At least half of the exercise I get every day comes from jumping to conclusions. And that's using your fast brain. Okay. And the last video clip I'm going to show you in a second is called The Danger of the Single Story. And it's about 7-8 minutes. I'm going to wrap it up with that. But I do want your initial responses from that video through your chat. And then I'm going to give you your homework and I'll leave you alone. All right.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara-Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now, here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. So I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle-class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I too am just as guilty in the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become.
Okay. I'd like for you all just to pause and ponder for a second and send me some thoughts. What's going on through your heads right now about the danger of the single story. And think about in the context of schools and how that plays out in schools when we have a single story about a group of people. What's your thoughts on the video? Good. All right, good thoughts, good comments. All right. And the thoughts about students' perceptions and having a single story is true also. And because they have their own perceptions, they get those perceptions from their home, the media, and other places, and they have perceptions about you as classroom teachers also. But I look at those perceptions they may have of me as opportunities, teachable moments. And so I kind of welcome those, those comments and thoughts. I was doing some work with Jefferson County Public Schools here in Kentucky, in Louisville. That's our largest school district. There are about 110,000 kids. And we're talking about making sure that the content was relevant to the students. There's 117 different languages spoken in Jefferson County Public Schools, and very diverse. And probably about 64% of their students are students of color. And they showed me this diagram that all the library books from kindergarten to 5th grade, only about 15% of the books were about people from different races or people of color. And this was about 2 years ago. They showed me that diagram. And so people need to see themselves in their instruction and things of that nature. So I always say, and I'm going to show you this last slide. I always say that really one way to combat our biases, which is really difficult because, you know, just a lot of these things are in us, is that we deal with people as individuals first, not as a group. Deal with people as individuals first and not as a group. And that will help considerably. Okay. Okay, a couple of things to deal with our biases, question our assumptions, look for patterns in your reaction responses to certain people or situations, know your triggers, what sets you off. Situation will get you defensive, impatient, or angry. Those are a couple of things, and a couple other things too. Use tools to explore your own conscious bias. We're going to do this in a second. I'll tell you more about that. Slow down, shift your thinking, fast brain systems, your amygdala. Use your slow brain, your prefrontal cortex. That's where you process information and things like that. That's why kids just say stuff, because your prefrontal cortex doesn't really fully develop until your early to mid 20s. And so that explains a lot of how our middle school kids do what they do sometimes. In particular, there are several strategies that appear to make a difference. Information. What's the psychological basis for biases? It's how our brains work. So that's what I said. It's unconscious, because it's not like you're sitting around trying to do these things to people. If you want to get better and want to more about your biases, it needs to be internal, not external. You know, just to be a better person, not to be a better teacher or a better doctor or a better accountant or a better professor, but just to be a better person. Internally, not about your position initially. And then by doing that, being a better person, you'll be a better teacher, a better doctor, a better accountant, a better nurse, and things like that. And then just developing individual relations and focus on people as individuals versus what group they are members of and things of that nature. And then the context or environment. Look at your print-rich environment at your schools, and how diverse are those images in the hallways, in the classrooms, in the libraries, regardless of the ethnic makeup and demographics in your school. It shouldn't matter what the demographics looks like. You should have, you know, diversity displayed everywhere, regardless of the demographics in your school. Okay. Once you become aware we have biases and own them, we have the power to change our mind. All right, here's your homework, which is optional. I would like each of you to assess your bias through the implicit association test. There's the link to it. It's at Harvard. It's free. You got to read the instructions and agree to something. They don't know your information or whatever. And the cool thing about this implicit bias assessment is that you can pick anything you want to see what your biases are. So you can do it on race, gender, religion, weight, age, geographical location, sex. I mean, they have like 12 different areas that you can like assess yourself. So you can pick anyone you want to do that. And once you do the assessment, if you choose to do the assessment, just shoot me an email about your experience of taking the assessment, your thoughts or whatever. That's all I have, Alyssa. And you're going to send me some chats based on what you learned, what you realized about this conversation, what you was pleased about it, and I was not aware of. So you can send me a few of those right now. And then I'm going to send the PowerPoint. I have to probably send the videos separately to Ellen and Alyssa, and she can share. I'm sure y'all got some kind of portal somewhere. She can share the PowerPoint with you all. Alyssa, anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cleveland, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. I think I was able to put in the link. If you'll just double check that for me, Dr. Cleveland, make sure I didn't mess that up. I was trying to do it pretty quick. But thank you everyone for coming by and checking in with us. Next week, we do have 2 opportunities for professional development. They will be on Tuesday. We'll